Hi guys, I hope you can hear me. We'll make a start at 7:30, but I've just thought I would start early. But I hope you can hear me okay. Type in the message chat if you can hear me and if everything's okay. I don't know how many we got online at the moment. Oh, we got 16 viewers, and that's not bad. We're not going to break any records, but that's still great. So we got Rob, yeah, loud and clear, fantastic, thank you. Win7, can hear. Hollow, okay, there's a question from, I'm in year 12 and my politics teacher left my class. Wow, so what's happened since then, Hollow Purple? I mean, have you got a politics teacher or are you basically without a politics teacher? Wow. Thanks, Everett. That's good to hear. We'll make a start. We'll make a start soon as when we start. Right. Okay, brilliant. Excellent. So, Safe, are you going to do global or USA for paper free? I teach global mostly for paper free. So, I'm not going to be talking about, global examples today, but I may do a politics one, sorry, a global one at some point. Yeah, but I do global. I have got on my website it's from last year, but I did do a revision day for USA. Actually, it was more of a contemporary examples revision day. We spent the whole day just looking at contemporary examples. But yeah, that's on my website. But I hope you guys are all well. So tell me before we begin. Again, it's a couple of minutes before we start. Just tell me where you are. So we've got a few of you I've noticed from year 12. Do we have any year 13? I would imagine most of you are year 13 students waiting to sit your exams. Is that a fair assumption to make? Yeah. You're in year 13. Rosa, Tom, you're in year 13. Yeah. Yeah, everyone mostly seem to be year 13. Good. And I mean, I don't think you have yet, but you're probably nearing the end of your course, right? So I suspect Easter is when you start your revision. Everett, you're at the end of year 10, taking this A level early. Fantastic. Year 10. That's really impressive. So what, you're doing when did you start your A levels? Of your politics A level, Everett? And is this your first year of your politics A level? Oh, Rosa, you finished your content in January. Well, that's really early, isn't it? I know some schools do that. They finish quite early, then they start revision. Is it Dia? You're in year 12. Fantastic. Okay. Right. So for those of you who've just joined me, I'm asking which year you're in, and how is it going really? I mean, where are you in the course? Everett, so you started at the end of September last year, right? So this is your first year, right? So you're going to be doing your first year now. Okay, that's cool. So Alyssa, your school is extremely behind on content, so you're worried. Okay, that's not good. That's not good. Right. So I am going to begin. Oh, we're doing quite well. We're almost 50 viewers. That's pretty cool. I would like to introduce you, I suppose, to Nora. Nora's my helper today. Nora's going to be helping me with comment management. So I get these comments on the screen and I can't multitask. So Nora's going to be capturing your comments, and from time to time, I'll ask Nora to read out some of your questions or your comments for me. But Nora, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. Yes, I'm Nora. I'm currently in year 13 studying for my exams. So if anyone also has any questions about anything more general, I'm happy to help with anything.
Fantastic. And Nora looks after my TikTok page, which isn't very active. It's my failure rather than Nora's. She's always asking me for content, but it's doing pretty well. Nora, where are we now on subscription or subscribers, if that's the right word?
So we have followers.
Followers.
We have 1.6 followers,
Hmm,
which is good.
not
Very
bad.
good.
Yeah. So
Um,
Rosalie came from TikTok. She said, what did you say?
Perfect. I was going to say we've just had a few people commenting saying that they're going to join now from TikTok.
Fantastic. Um, I do probably need to. I should confess, I need to give you much more content to put on our TikTok page, but that's good. So yes, same. My school is on UK government executive. So okay, you're in year 12. Right. So I'm going to probably slowly ignore the comments and leave that to Nora to filter out, and from time to time she can ask me. She can sort of read out your questions and your comments. That's probably a better way of doing this. But I'm glad this is working. I'm using a new piece of software, so it's wonderful this is working. Right, I think I'm going to make a start. In fact, I would like to come back to you, Nora. So before I do begin, so we have got a couple of minutes, and I know we're waiting for a few stragglers to arrive. But Nora, do you want to say a few words about your TikTok? Also, Nora's been looking after my website this year, so I'm sure, Nora, you've got some comments to make about how to use the website.
Yeah, of course. So I genuinely find the website really useful too. Obviously, they have full essays there, but also if you're struggling with layout or examples, or especially I find it very helpful to format my conclusions. There are essays on the website for all of the topics, all of the papers. I definitely recommend looking at the website if you're struggling at all with any plans or anything. And then the TikTok, we have short and snappy videos that will have a lot of revision aid for you. So, and if anyone has any recommendations of what to put, just always put a comment on the TikTok, or you can even put it in the comments here and I'll take note of them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nora. That's great. And actually, many of the newer essays are Nora's essays. So if you want to comment on those essays and thank Nora, I mean, they're very good, fantastic essays. Okay, so what I promised today is to give you to go through some contemporary UK politics and UK government examples. Now, a lot of the examples I'm going to show you today have actually been extracted from some webinars I've been hosting. So a lot of it will be based on, will come out of the essays that I've been working on with students. But the plan today is really to just go through a number of UK political examples. Now, before we begin, I mean, I would like to just give a quick plug to two things, really. Firstly, my book on Amazon. So I can't, recommend this enough. It is my book, so I suppose I should be recommending it. But it's a very handy way to revise because I have within it not just sample questions that you can use for revision. So these are questions that I've made up looking at the specification. But also I have within it, over 45 pages of detailed essay plans. So if you want really good quality essay plans, and they're very detailed, I would suggest this is a great book to purchase from Amazon. It's not very expensive. And to be honest, it's been a labor of love. I put it together over a number of years, really. And last summer, I decided to just compile it together into a single booklet and add some more content to it. So I've had some really good feedback from people on the book. So it'd be wonderful to get your feedback as well. I'm not sure if any of you have had this book, by the way. You may. Oh, Rob, you've ordered it already from Amazon. Fantastic. The other thing I would like to say, and again, it's not. I'm not trying to. I'm very bad at selling stuff. I'm not here to sell you things. But the other thing which I would highly recommend, and actually Nora attends these as well, and I'm sure she would say something similar. Every week on a Monday, and now on a Saturday for Global Politics, I do these weekly webinars where we just work through 2 or 3 essays in great detail, and I've weave in contemporary examples and analysis. So I think it's a good place to start your revision. I always say to students that the core to revision is essay writing. And if you can write as many essays as possible, full essays, essay plans, detailed essay plans, you will be in a good position for your exam. I mean, just to give you an example, this last couple of weeks, we've been looking at the UK Constitution, and I'm fairly convinced the question you'll get in your component 2 for Edexcel, component 1 for AQA, but in your UK government paper, we've probably covered in Constitution in our webinars. So I'm fairly confident. I mean, every year, students who attend the webinars tell me that probably something in the region of 90% of the paper has been covered through those detailed essay conversations that we have on a weekly basis. So, if you are stuck for revision, if you're not stuck, I mean, you don't need to go through that. I think a book like this would be enough. But if you really need guided help, I would highly recommend attending those webinars. Elisa bought the book and she's really enjoys it. She's found it amazing. That's good to hear. And so is Leonore. Fantastic. And Hollow might get it. Don't worry about it, Hollow. That's fine. Is there an online version of the book? There isn't quite an online version of it. I have got my essay plans, but it's not. The book was far more. I developed it far more, but I may put it online at some point before the exam. Baria's got a question here. And sorry, Nora, I'm taking your thunder here, but I will stop looking at the comments in a second. But Baria's question is, how many essays should you write before the exam? I've always said to, and Nora will give you my standard answer, and that is that there aren't any amounts. You don't say, I can't say how many you should write. All I would say is you should write as many as possible. Like, if you should never revise by taking notes from your textbook. I will place that as the lower end of revision. Never revise for A-level politics by putting up, posters on your wall and coloring them in. I don't think that's really that useful. The core to revision is to write essays, right? Now, if you haven't, so Elisa's question is, what if, we started in January, but now it's of course March. So all of the essays that we've written so far and the webinars for those essays have been recorded. So if you purchase those past sessions, and you're able to see the online recordings as well. So that's perfectly fine. Right, we have got 105 viewers. I was saying to Nora before we started, Nora, we'll be lucky to get around 5 people today. I don't know why. I convinced myself that we wouldn't get more than 5 people. So that's fantastic. We've got quite a lot today. All right, good. I think I should continue. So let's begin. So I'm no longer going to look at the comments, but you can certainly write your questions. And from time to time, Nora will read out your questions to me. But I'm just going to go through some contemporary examples that I think you could use in your essays. For those of you in year 13, typically in year 13, you'd either be doing US or global politics. And so you may have lost contact with UK politics for some time. And that's, of course, not a good thing, because you've got to write 2 exam papers are very much UK politics focused. And so you do really need to have a good knowledge of contemporary political examples. I mean, I often think they do it the wrong way around. Maybe it's better to do global or US first and then do UK second, just because more is more of your paper will focus on, of your papers will focus on UK politics than global or US politics. But anyway, it is what it is. Now, in my mind, if you've got good quality contemporary examples, you will push your essay into an A-star category. So students often ask me, how do I get an A-star in politics? And my answer to them is, an A-star really is probably the following ingredients. You need to have solid evaluation from the beginning and throughout your essay. So you've got to have judgments at the beginning and throughout your essay. And for those of you who don't know what that means, I've got a video on the front page of my website that looks at how to write a 30-mark question. And that also applies to AQA, even though in AQA it's 25 mark. So you've got to have good quality evaluation throughout your essay. You've got to have sophisticated analysis. And again, I explained what sophisticated analysis is in that video. But very importantly, you've got to have good quality contemporary examples. So what I mean by contemporary examples are examples that are not necessarily contained in the textbook. These are examples that you've come across today. These are examples that, may, in fact, there's one example I'm going to cite, which I just heard in the news an hour before going live today. So the more contemporary your examples, the more you're going to impress upon your examiner that you are really a student of politics, as opposed to a student of the textbook, right? So the textbook may still be talking about, I don't know, may still be talking about Fathers for Justice as a pressure group. Now, Fathers for Justice is a very old pressure group, and it's effectively obsolete now. It's gone, right? But there are more interesting pressure groups like Extinction Rebellion, or or Insulate UK, Just Stop Oil, the Palestine Solidarity Council. These are really interesting pressure groups because they're in the news now, right? They're constantly being talked about because of contemporary events, whether that's environmental or Gaza, or wherever it may be. So the more you can bring in contemporary examples, the better quality your essays are. And so in my mind, it's good to keep a log of examples. And one way by which you can do that is just to have a separate book or a separate part in your folder where you just list in examples, and you're very quickly saying, this is a topic it may be linked to. So for example, pressure group, here's an interesting pressure group, write 2 or 3 comments about that pressure group, maybe a stat or 2, and then say, this is great for the democracy section in component 1. And the more you do that, the more you're going to remind yourself of these political examples, contemporary examples in the future. Okay.
We have a few questions. Just
go for it.
I to read them out.
Yeah.
So, will you be doing any last-minute revision the night before the papers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did do last year, and I sort of regretted it because there were lots of panicked people, and I don't like panicked people the day before exams. So I sort of said to them at the end of it, I think you should get some sleep, because I think it was a morning exam. I may do. I'll probably do a last minute thing, not last minute. Let's say I'll do it probably 3 or 4 days before your exam. So at least that gives you some time, right? Really interestingly, I think it was component 1 last year, or component 2. I did that. In component 1, I did it the night before. Component 2, I think I gave it 4 or 5 days. And believe it or not, we looked at a couple of essays that came up. So in effect, there were 2 essays that came up almost word for word in that component 2 paper. That was basically 2/3 of the paper we had looked at a few days before the exam, which was a fluke, quite frankly. But fantastic. What else is there, Nora?
Someone has asked what the difference between a hung parliament and minority government is.
Yeah, I am going to answer that, although it's probably beyond today's session to answer those really specific knowledge questions. But let me give you a quick answer. A hung parliament is where you don't have any one party that has overall control over parliament, right? So if you remember, there are 650 seats, and you need 326 to win a majority. So a hung parliament is anything under 326. So that's a parliament where no party has actually won it. So in 2010, we had a hung parliament. Now, a minority government is one of the options that come out of a hung parliament, right? So a hung parliament, imagine you've got 320 seats. So you haven't reached the 326 target. That's a hung parliament. Now you can either decide to form a coalition with another party, or you can decide to form a minority government. There is also another type of government you can form, which is a confidence and supply arrangement, which actually happened in 2017 with Theresa May. But that's a different story. But generally speaking, a hung parliament can either lead to a coalition government, or a hung parliament can lead to a minority government, right? And a minority government then would be quite weak because it needs to seek support from across the aisle. It needs to seek support from others. before it's able to govern. I hope that answers the question very briefly, though, but I hope that answers it. But I would say these knowledge-y questions, let's leave it to the end, so that we can go through some of the political examples. But go for it, Nora. Anything else?
I'll take this final one. You've sort of already answered this, but someone is asking if there'll be a contemporary example live on either US politics or global politics.
Yeah, that is a good question. So I probably will do something on US and global politics, I think. So yeah, I may do that. Yeah, if there is a demand for it, let's do it. So I've got no problem in doing that. There's a lot in global politics going on. US politics will require me to just brush up on some contemporary. I mean, I follow it, but I probably need to brush up on it before I do that. But I will do that. I mean, just before I forget, I am planning to host at King's College. I do this every year. I do these live revision sessions. We normally do it during Easter or just after Easter. So you're welcome to turn up to that as well. But that will be all available on my website. And if you haven't subscribed to my Substack, you're welcome to do so. So yeah, good. Anything else, Nora?
No, what I'll do is any questions on revision or broader things, I'll collect and then ask you at the end. So if anyone thinks I'm ignoring those questions, I'm not. I'll just collect them and then I'll keep them till the end.
Blame Nora, please. Don't blame me.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So let's go through some great political examples there. And I'm going to pick on some contemporary events because I think it's always a good way into these types of sessions. So let's talk about Gaza and what's happening in Gaza. Now, the first thing to say about the Gaza conflict, if we were to call it that, is that there is what we call bipartisan support on the general policies on Gaza. In other words, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are at one, generally speaking, on the policy towards Gaza. In particular, the Labour Party has not moved away from mirroring the Conservative Party in, for example, back in Israel at the very beginning of the conflict in October, November. Starmer was very clear that Israel has the right to self-defense. If you remember, there was that pretty horrible situation on LBC Radio where he was asked by Nick Ferrari as to whether it was acceptable for Israel to lay siege to Gaza, in effect, withhold medicines and food and clothing and electricity. And he sort of responded by saying, yes, it's okay. It's allowed. It's fine to do that because they're acting in self-defense, right? Now, of course, Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer, so he should know that sieges are not allowed. They're illegal in international law. But you can see how anxious he is to mirror government policy over Gaza, very anxious to mirror that. He doesn't want to show a difference between himself and the government on Gaza. I'll explain why in a second. So the first thing to say about policy is actually there isn't very much difference between the two parties on foreign policy, but in particular on Gaza. You can see that with people like David Lammy, who supported Israel's right to self-defense. And he then went on later on to say that its response must be proportionate and within the bounds of international law. But he only said that after David Cameron, the foreign secretary, said it, right? So again, you've got this mirroring of the government position. The Labour Party, in other words, has not gone beyond at any point the government position on Gaza. They've been broadly unified. Now, that marks a major contrast to the deep divisions over Israel-Palestine that existed during the era of Jeremy Corbyn, of course, because Jeremy Corbyn, as party leader, he was very pro-Palestinian. And if you remember, a lot of the attacks on him came from that position that he was too pro-Palestinian. So maybe one of the reasons why Keir Starmer and David Lammy and Emily Thornberry and Wes Streeting and the rest of the front bench of the Labour Party have been so cautious in moving away from the government position is that they don't want to go back to those old days where they may be labelled as anti-Semitic over Gaza. So there is sort of a recognition from the Labour Party's perspective that they didn't like what happened during Corbyn's era. Now, that doesn't mean the Labour Party is unified completely over Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. In fact, across the country, there has now been over, and I think it's now over 70 councillors that have resigned in utter horror at Labour Party policy over Gaza, right? So a good example you could raise in an exam, you could put in a paper in an exam, is that 9 councillors in Oxford, very leafy Oxford, 9 councillors resigned over Gaza policy. And so Oxford Council is now, it's not controlled by Labour anymore. It's got no overall control. And that shows just the intensity of feeling there is out there. In Bolton, there are a number of councillors that resigned as well. And not only that, some MPs have also been sacked from the party. In fact, there's one particular MP, Kate Osamor from Edmonton, who has been suspended from the party because she said she likened what was happening in Gaza to the Holocaust on Holocaust Memorial Day. So she said something like, the horrors of the Holocaust should never be repeated, but there's also a Holocaust taking place, or words to that effect, in Gaza, right? And that was a step too far for the party, and the party in effect, suspended the whip. So she no longer sits as a Labour MP in Parliament. So again, you can use Kate Osamor of an example. I mean, a lot of Labour people are saying that this is probably the most authoritarian party there is, in the sense that it's so centralised. A number of councillors have actually been sacked for calling for a ceasefire. Now that's really odd, because 2 of its most important non-Westminster politicians have actually called for a ceasefire, and they called for it quite early on. So Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham. Sadiq Khan is, of course, the mayor of London, and Andy Burnham is the mayor of Manchester, Greater Manchester. They have called for a ceasefire. Now, what is interesting there is that they haven't been sacked like other members have been sacked from the party for calling for a ceasefire. And that's because they're too important in the party. They've got a stature, they've got a position, a status within the Labour Party. And so you can't sack Andy Burnham. You can't take away, the sort of a party membership from people like Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan. So there is a strain there. But what I would say is that for Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan have called for a ceasefire before the Labour front bench called for a ceasefire, but they never criticised Labour for it. They've always sort of used it as a way of criticising the Conservative Party, and maybe that's the way they've got away with it, right? Now, maybe it's worth saying here that there's another reason why the Labour Party in particular are so keen to not be seen to be so pro-Palestinian or so pro-Gaza, even though by any accounts, I mean, it's now very clear. In fact, the Secretary of State of the United States just said yesterday that there is a famine taking place in Gaza. So it's now widely accepted that what Israel has done is disproportionate and unacceptable on so many levels, right? But I suppose the reason why Labour has been very cautious, apart from not trying to be too closely connected to the Corbyn history, another reason I think is because they want the United States to recognize them to be reliable partners. In other words, if you decide, if you end up contradicting the United States, then you're sending a signal to the US that you're going to be a government that is not going to be positive towards the US partnership, right? And so they're playing this sort of tightrope. They've got to make sure that the US are happy with their position. Now, you and I may say, well, why? Why does any government, even a government in waiting, why does it need to be so close to the United States? And you can make a connection here with the Tony Blair Labour Party. One of the reasons why Tony Blair made sure that he never separated from the US, even during that disastrous war and terror period, where in 2003 they went to war in Iraq. One of the reasons why Tony Blair decided he's never going to separate from the US is because there's too much at stake for Britain's economy to be punished by the United States for being aloof or being separate from them, right? So there is a reason why they do that, and they believe that the future of the United Kingdom really lies in having a strong connection with the United States. Just one last thing to say about Gaza. So all of what I've said so far could fit within a political party's essay. So, for example, if you had an essay, to what extent are the major political parties, do they agree on policies and ideas? You could bring that into to that essay. You could use foreign policy as one of your sections, or Gaza even as one of your sections, right? One last point to make is the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle. So there was this real issue last month over the SNP raised a second opposition day motion, right? So the SNP have 3 days in a year where they can run the timetable. So they had a second motion on Gaza. They dedicated it to a motion. A motion is not compulsory for the government to accept, but it shows like what the House believes in. Sorry. So the SNP wanted to pass a motion on an immediate ceasefire on Gaza. So Lindsay Hoyle, who's the Speaker of the House, it seems that he had a meeting with Keir Starmer, and after that meeting, he decided, oddly, and it was a very odd decision, he decided that he's not going to hear the SNP motion first, but rather he's going to hear the Labour motion. And if everyone votes for that Labour motion, then there will be no reason to hear the SNP motion. And that broke with lots of conventions, because the way it works is if an opposition day is dedicating their day to a motion, then it's not acceptable to give that over to another party. And the leader of the SNP in the House of Commons did comment, this is unacceptable. You can't just be giving our opposition day over to the Labour Party. And he commented that this was actually the Labour's opposition day, not the SNP's opposition day. So Lindsay Hoyle was criticised quite heavily for being partial, for being on the side of the Labour Party. Now, if you know, and you would have studied this in class, the Speaker of the House is meant to be independent from all the parties. So Lindsay Hoyle is actually a Labour member, but he had to give up his Labour membership to be the Speaker of the House when he was elected as Speaker of the House. So a lot of people criticized him for being totally partial, totally biased, and on the side of the Labour Party. And that's why Keir Starmer was able to convince him. He did later on make a comment that I didn't do it. There was no coercion. I did this because, I wanted to safeguard the security of members in the House. But that just didn't make any sense. No one got it. Like, what has a motion in Parliament got anything to do with security? So he confused the matter even more. So here's the analysis you can take from this example. You could criticize Lindsay Hoyle in your essay by saying that, Parliament sometimes doesn't function when the Speaker of the House during this SNP motion opposition day, he sided with Labour. Now, the question may come to mind, why Labour? Like, what's Labour got to do with this? Because Labour was criticised quite heavily after that day. See, Labour did not want a split within its party. It knew that there were lots of backbenchers within the Labour Party that would vote with the SNP motion. And so in order to prevent that, they sort of found a way into Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House, so that the SNP motion would never come to the floor. You can say that's deeply undemocratic, or at least deeply problematic, right? And it certainly is. And the SNP have been pretty angry since then. And they've actually said to Lindsay Hoyle that you no longer have credibility and we need to find a way to get rid of you. They've actually said they want to get rid of him. So, it was high drama in the House of Commons. Right, I'm going to pause there. Nora, is there anything on Gaza that others have raised that you would like to read out?
Yes. So someone asked if this could be used in a Labour Party division essay, and I think that would be a really good example to use.
It would be. In
Um,
fact, you're right. See, I think you could use this, and then you could also go back to Corbyn's era, and so it's a really great example, right? You could almost, and by the way, we are due a Labour Party divisions essay, so it could come up. So you could almost dedicate an entire section on the Middle East. Go for it, Nora.
um, Alyssa has asked if you could just explain what an opposition day is a bit more.
Yeah, that's good. So an opposition day is so normally the way that Parliament works, the House of Commons works, is the government is responsible for scheduling almost every day of the debates and discussions in the House of Commons. Sorry, so the Speaker of the House is not responsible for scheduling, unlike the Speaker of the House in the US, House of Representatives or Senate. Remember, the Speaker of the House, they're responsible for scheduling. That's not the case for the UK. It's the political, it's the Conservatives in government who schedule almost every debate in the House of Commons, right? Now, why is that important? Because there's only some exceptions to that. And the exceptions are 15 days for the Labour Party, who are the official opposition, and 3 days for the third party, who in this case are the SNP. So that's an opportunity for those parties to to set the agenda for that day, right? Every other day in the year, the agenda is effectively set by the government. I mean, there's a few more exceptions, but effectively set by the government. Um, so that's an opportunity for them to do something. Now, they could do a number of things. They could sponsor a bill, they could sponsor a motion, they could do all sorts of things. Normally, they're not going to sponsor a bill because they don't have the majority to get that bill passed, unlike in America. So normally, they're going to put forward a motion, and a motion is non-binding, but it sort of gives the general direction of the House, and it's like morally, if that goes against the government morally, it's quite an important thing to have happened. The SNP believe that they could split the Labour Party and show how weak the Labour Party really is by hosting this motion, but their motion never actually got a chance to be voted on because Lindsay Hoyle, he undermined it effectively. Yeah. Anything else, Nora, on Gaza?
Yes, we actually have a lot of questions. It's good.
Oh, great. Okay.
So Noah has asked, was it counted as Labour's opposition day or SNP's?
SNPs. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
right. Which is a shame, right? But it was SNPs. You're right. Yeah.
Um, Nicolette has asked, since usually paragraph should be agree versus disagree, how would you use foreign policy slash Gaza as an agree versus disagree paragraph in an essay?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because the agreement is, of course, they agree in everything almost, right? So where do they disagree on Gaza? I think the way to probably talk about the disagreements is the disagreements have come about recently, and they're on tone. They're not really on substance. They're disagreements on things like the Labour Party have recently changed their tune on Gaza, and they've tonally, at least, they've started to use stronger language, right? So, for example, I mean, one example is Wes Streeting, the rather odious shadow health secretary, who who at the very beginning was saying things like, a ceasefire. We're not ready for a ceasefire yet. Like, it's not the time for a ceasefire. He's changed his tune on the ceasefire, and he's sort of like speaking quite tough language, right? But if you dig deeper, actually, it's just tonally he's changed. What hasn't changed is the substance. They're still, in effect, everything they say has to come from the perspective that Israel has the right to self-defense, and the Americans are our partners, and so there's all sorts of asterisks when they say it. So tonally they've changed. Now, I don't think that's enough to write a counter paragraph, by the way. So here's how I think you could do it. You could make this a foreign policy paragraph, and in your agreements you could talk about Gaza. But on the next slide, I can talk about some of the disagreements that exist between them on foreign policy. So I'm going to give you some other examples on foreign policy where there may be some more disagreements. Yeah. What else then, or anything else?
Rosalie has asked if it could be used as a failure of the opposition to bring alternative policy on such a key issue like foreign policy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analysis point. I like that, Rosalie. Yeah, that shows you something about the opposition, right? The opposition is meant to be there. Her Majesty's or His Majesty's opposition is meant to be there to stand up to government, to oppose government. But of course, Keir Starmer has made this calculated risk, I suppose, that he doesn't want to stand up to government on this particular issue. He would rather be. It's like COVID. On COVID, both, by the way, both Corbyn and Keir Starmer were pretty similar on COVID, like on that issue. They weren't so. Um, they weren't so anti-government, right? Well, Keir Starmer. I mean, what am I saying? Corbyn. Yeah, Keir Starmer. He wasn't particularly anti-government. So I think there's a similar thing going on here with Gaza. Yeah, so that's a good point, Rosalie. I like that point actually.
Lots of people have been asking if this will be posted and saved on your channel afterwards, so they
It
can
will
watch it
be.
back.
It will be, exactly. It'll all be saved. You can watch it. You can watch it in 5 years' time if you want to, after your exams, just for posterity's sake. Posterity? Am I saying? Is that even a word? Have I just made up a word, Nora?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Hollow Purple has asked if this could be linked to a democracy and participation question, or perhaps a UK government parliament question.
Yeah, I think it certainly could be linked to a UK government parliament question, couldn't it? Because there's a lot of parliament stuff there. Democracy. Well, you could do, couldn't you? I mean, there is a point being made here about I suppose, like if you had a democratic deficit question, which actually came up last year, didn't it? So you won't get it again. But if you did have a question like that, you could say people are pretty tired. I mean, what is interesting at the moment is there's a movement all over the country for none of the above, like anti-conservative, anti-Labour. Think about George Galloway's win in Rochdale. Gorgeous George, as they call him. You know, he won this election, and he won it, this by-election. I mean, he won it on what, 12,000 votes. But not only that, the nearest opposition to him was 6,000 by another independent, right? So, you know, it's the rise of the independents in a way. We may see, you know, many more independent-minded MPs in this coming election, right, later on this year. I mean, it's probably going to be in October. So, you know, you may find, for example, that I was talking about West Streeton. I mean, in West Streeton's constituency, you've got you know, a young lady called Leanne Mohammed, who's you know, standing against him as an independent. You've got in Bethnal Green, you've got a guy called a lawyer called Tasneem Akunji. You've got a few people in the north whose names I forget standing. Now, I don't know how successful some of these people are going to be, but certainly you've got, there is a democratic deficit, and people are now looking beyond the two big political parties. So that could be one of the big features of this coming election, I suspect. Yeah, Laura. Anything else?
Sorry, I'm just looking.
No worries.
Could you use the Opposition Day example in an essay of the influence of minor parties?
Yeah, you can, can't you? I think the SNP are pretty cool, I have to say. And I don't say that for many parties. I mean, the Liberal Democrats for me are just a waste of space, right? They're a waste of space because Edexcel insist on claiming that the Liberal Democrats with 15 MPs are a major party. That always irks me. I remember on election night in 2019, or was it 17, I tweeted out, this is the best tweet I've ever sent out. I tweeted out something like, finally, Edexcel is going to have to revise its specification because there is no way the Liberal Democrats could be counted as a major party. And politics teachers across the country liked, for the first time, like reposted my tweet. So that was, you know, I think I got something like 80 reposts. I mean, that's pretty cool. So yeah. But generally speaking, yeah, so you're right. You know, I think back to the SNP. I mean, you can talk about the SNP's power, and they have. I'm going to say a few words. I've actually spent too long on this, by the way. I need to go through this quite quickly now. But yeah, I think it's such a great example. Shall we move on, Nora? Is there anything burning to talk about?
Aisha has asked about the analysis of the minor parties' role in this, but so if you maybe could quickly touch on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, although we're not really discussing analysis, it is always worth thinking about. So remember, analysis is why something's happened at a very basic level, or the reasons, or substantiate. And you may give an example, and then you say the context of that example, the motivation. So haven't we said, look, what was the motivation of the SNP? Well, the motivation of the SNP was to undermine Labour. That seemed to me to be the obvious reason why the SNP did what it did. It wanted to show that Labour was divided. Why? Because, of course, the SNP have an almighty battle in the coming general election to hang on to their really handsome majority that they've got, or handsome number that they've got in Westminster's Parliament. And the likelihood is that the Labour Party may do much better this time round than the SNP. So Hansa Yusuf, who's the leader of the SNP, he sees this as a way of undermining Labour. And by doing that, you undermine them in Scotland. So you get my point. The analysis is the motivation in this case, right? But also you could say that's a political motive. You could actually say there's an absolute genuine motive, and that is, it is what the ICJ has said, which is, what we're witnessing here is a very plausible genocide, and I think that's a very a strong statement to make, but I think that's a very true statement to make about what's happening in Gaza. It's it's horrific. There was I mean, this is more global politics, but there was a I can't remember her name now, an Indian journalist who said, where this is what we call an ambient genocide. Like you got ambient music on, like music in the background. It's almost like an ambient genocide, like it's happening around us and we sort of know it's happening, but it's sort of in the background. And that makes it's a very uneasy thing to live with. But yes, okay, I'm going to move on, I think, if that's all right, Nora.
Yeah, of course. We've Rosalie said that thankfully posterity was the right word.
Posterity.
Posterity. I think you said posterity. I think you're mixing prosperity and posterity together.
Well, you can see, because when I started saying it, I was sort of, okay, well, what am I saying now? Is this even a word? Do you sometimes, I'm sure all of you have this, you say something and then you think, have I actually said, is that even a word for me? Anyway, thank you very much, Nora. That's good to hear. Thank you, Rosalie, for correcting my my grammar, or whatever it's called. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's talk about foreign. I'm going to have to skim through this. I was only meant to spend an hour on this, but we're doing quite well. How are we doing with numbers? Okay, we've still got a few here. Right, foreign policy. So on a number of issues, we can see that again there is probably quite a lot of similarity between the two big parties. On China in particular and Ukraine, there's a lot of similarity, right? One difference you find is with Lisa Nandy's department, the Department for International Development. Actually, there's a couple of differences. I haven't put one of the differences down here. Let me explain one of it. So the Labour Party are quite hot on international development. The Conservatives under Boris Johnson, they got rid of the Department for International Development and put it under the Foreign Secretary. So at the moment, the Andrew Mitchell, who is the Minister for International Development, he sits under David Cameron's department, right? The Labour Party believe that international development should be a separate position, like they had previously. So under previous Labour governments, you had a separate ministry called International Development, and that's because they believe that international development is part of their liberal agenda. It's part of their sort of the agenda of development work, whereas the Conservatives seem to downplay international development. So you could say one big difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party on international development is simply that the Labour Party would like to bring back the position of Secretary of State for International Development, right? And Lisa Nandy, she gave a speech where she said that the UK needs to be a development superpower. And so And so in some ways you can say they're talking up international development, whereas the Conservative Party have been talking down international development. Now that's not quite fair. Andrew Mitchell, who is the International Development Secretary, he was the International Development Secretary under David Cameron. He has been quite strong on international development issues recently, right? So you can say there's a difference there and a agreement there. But I think the Labour Party has gone a bit further in suggesting that it would like to reset the position of international development. David Lammy, who's a shadow foreign secretary, he criticized the Conservatives for their inconsistency on China. And what he meant by that is the Conservatives are just not very clear on a singular policy on China. But in reality, it's a tonal difference, I think. I don't think in substance, Lammy is that different to the Conservative Party in China. Let me just give you a quick summary. China is a really big challenge for both America and Britain and other European countries, because on one level, you've got to have good relations with China for the sake of things like global action on climate change or AI technology and just general trade. So you've got to have these good relations with China. But at the same time, there is a question mark on China's motivations in the world, right? Is China really a good faith actor? And so do you see China as a trading partner or as a competitor? And the Labour Party's point is that the Conservative Party are very ambiguous on China. On one level, they're cozying up with China. And then in the other level, they echo the American perspective, which is they're a competitor. I believe that. And so the Labour Party say, no, you've got to be a bit more clearer on this. Now, here's the motive. If you want analysis, I think the Labour Party is really sending a signal to the Biden administration and to possibly the Trump administration in the future. By talking a little bit more tougher on China, they want to show the Americans again that they're reliable partners, right? So although there's a difference there with the Conservative Party, there's also a sort of a recognition that we need to be close to America, also known as the Blair policy of being close to America, as I talked about before. Yes, there's a number of other things. I mean, I'm not going to go through AUKUS in any great length, and it's probably too long a discussion to have. I talk about it when we look at political parties in my webinars. But I'm just going to say a few words about Labour in Europe. So at the moment, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are pretty similar on the Europe policy. Labour doesn't want to go back into Europe, neither does the Conservative Party. But the speculation is that after a number of years, the Labour Party may start to slowly, gradually go back into some of the EU institutions, right? The Labour Party will swear blind it doesn't want to do that. But the Conservative Party have accused Labour of being closet Europeans. If you ask me, the Labour Party would prefer to at least be in to be in a closer relationship with Europe, even though it will take a long time to go back into Europe. It's not going to happen in the next generation. So the Labour Party. So the question is, why doesn't the Labour Party, if that they believe that? Because remember, the Labour Party are internationalists; they're Europeans, feel more Europeans than the Conservatives. So why don't they say that publicly? Well, because a third of Labour's voters voted for Brexit. And if you remember, and I'm going to come to it later, the red wall seats in the north, these were towns across the north that effectively voted for Brexit. And for Labour to win back control of Parliament, it needs to win back those seats. And that is why Labour has remained quite ambiguous on the European Union. Let me say a few words about Rwanda policy. Now, just today, the House of Lords has rejected once again the government's bill on Rwanda. So the government is passing a safety of Rwanda bill, right? A safety of Rwanda bill. This is a pretty important thing. I just caught, by the way, Rachel's question, should you give your own opinion on Gaza is a question. So in an exam setting, No, except if that opinion is based on like an analysis which is based on fact. So you can say the ICJ has said that we are there is a plausible genocide taking place. You can quote it if you want, right? And that's an acceptable thing to say. What you can't do in an essay necessarily is to give your own, like to spend a long time giving your own perspective. But by the way, you do give an evaluation. You obviously are meant to make a judgment. But yeah, it's not a newspaper column. In other words, you're not here to like an opinion column, an op-ed. It's really there to talk about to do what you're meant to be doing, which is write an essay. Yeah. I'm just going to take a sip of my chamomile tea, which is pretty cool. And it's pretty. I've come off caffeine completely, so I'm drinking a lot of chamomile tea and decaf coffee. And people ask me all the time, what's the worth drinking decaf coffee? But it's the same as saying, what's worth smoking a non-nicotine cigarette? Like you still feel like you're taking in the caffeine. So just the very fact that I drink hot water, and people say, why do you drink hot water? It's because it's like in my own mind, I'm drinking tea. Do you see? It's like holding a cigarette. Holding a mug is like holding a cigarette for me. So that's I don't smoke. I've never smoked, but that's just my thing. Okay, so yes, let's talk about Rwanda. The government is currently passing the Safety of Rwanda bill, right? Now that's a really strange name, the Safety of Rwanda. Basically, this bill is its basic aim is to say Rwanda is a safe country. Now, Kenneth Clark, who used to be the Justice Secretary, he's a Lord now, Lord Clark. He's a conservative. He said he's never seen a bill like this. Like, there's never been a bill that tries to explain a fact. It's like saying we're going to pass a bill to say that in the summer the sun comes out, right? It doesn't make any sense. That Rwanda is a safe country. That's the bill we're going to pass. Now, why is the government passing a bill that states Rwanda is a safe country? Well, they're passing that bill because there was a Supreme Court judgment in July last year, which basically said Rwanda is not a safe place to send migrants who come to the UK. So, as you know, and this started with Suella Braverman when she was Home Secretary, the government, and it's a horrible policy, really, the government wants to send migrants, asylum seekers who come to Britain illegally. They want to send them to Rwanda for the paperwork to be assessed. Right now, let me explain what that really means. That basically means that if you are a real asylum seeker, so you're fleeing, in Sudan at the moment, there's this horrible militia group that's going around killing people, right? So you imagine that you fled them, you've come to Britain on the boat, because by the way, there's no legal way to come to Britain from Sudan. It's impossible. So you come to Britain on the boat, and then you seek asylum in Britain. There's a possibility, according to the Rwanda plan, there was a possibility that you would be shipped off to Rwanda, and then in Rwanda, your claim for asylum would be assessed. And if your claim is found to be correct, you then would be a national of Rwanda. You wouldn't get a chance to come back to Britain, right? So let me explain the chronology of this. The government wanted to pass had this policy of sending some asylum seekers and migrants to Rwanda. They were going to do that, but then a group of lawyers, they put forward a case. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that the plan is unlawful. So it was a judicial review. The plan is unlawful, and migrants may face persecution if they were sent to Rwanda. So in order to undermine that, the government has passed, or wants to pass rather, the Safety of Rwanda bill. Now, let me explain what that bill means. That bill basically means that they would, there's a technical term for it, but I won't give you the technical term, partly because I've forgotten it, like posterity, I've forgotten it. But there's a technical term which states that they would, in effect, dilute parts of the Human Rights Act so that they could go ahead and send people to Rwanda. Now, the reason why they want to dilute parts of the Human Rights Act is because in that original case, which said that, where the Supreme Court said that they had acted unlawfully to want to send people to Rwanda, in that original case, the European Convention of Human Rights was used, right? So the government wants to basically say Rwanda is safe, and these things that you used in the Human Rights Act, you can no longer use that to undermine our efforts to send people to Rwanda. Now, I hope you've got that. You may want to listen to that again, but the long and short of it is that bill is going through Parliament. It's gone through the House of Commons. It went to the House of Lords. It was rejected and amended. It went back to the House of Commons, and a couple of days ago, the House of Commons voted for it again. It went for a second time to the House of Lords, and yet again, the House of Lords has rejected that bill. And what the House of Lords has done is they've amended it by saying something like the government cannot undermine international law. And so that was scuppered the bill, basically. The bill will become useless. So this is what we call parliamentary ping pong. Do you remember that from your lessons? Where it goes back and forth between the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Now, it's the second time. People expected the House of Commons to just, House of Lords to accept it and to pass it through. But the House of Lords just dug its heels in and said, we're not going to accept it, right? Now, if you remember from your lessons, they can do that for up to a year. And after a year, the government could incite or could use the Parliament Act to pass its legislation. But the government does not have a year, remember. And it's unlikely that the Labour Party would vote for it, right? The Labour Party have rejected it, by the way. So that's unlikely in government, which is very likely, they would form a government, that the Labour Party would accept the Rwanda bill. So it's in tatters. Now, by the way, just as a quick side point, and this tells you something about how ridiculous the current Labour Party is. The reason why the Labour Party voted against the Rwanda Safety of Rwanda bill isn't because it's inhumane, right? Which it is. It's absolutely inhumane. The reason why they voted against it is because they say it costs too much money. It's like £1 million per person to send to Rwanda. And their argument is that, it's just a gimmick, and it probably is, and you're doing it just to show your voters that somehow, we're tough on migrants, when in reality we're not tough on migrants, right? So I hope you've got all of that. Sorry if I'm going too fast here, but I hope you've got that. It's a good example, I think, of a bill.
We have a few questions about Rwanda. I think will be good to
go for it, Laura.
So Margaret has asked, when talking about the Rwanda policy, can you make references to the genocide that happened in the 90s, which is why they're hesitant, or is that irrelevant?
Yeah, you can do. And actually, people have made that reference, but like all things, it is inappropriate to say just because in the 90s there was a genocide that Rwanda is the same country. I mean, in many ways, Rwanda has moved on. But in our minds, right, we've just got, we've got this sort of because we don't follow politics so closely, we've got this very backward view of Rwanda. I don't think it's the same country, but at the same time, it still has some not horrific is probably the wrong word to use. It still has some very problematic human rights, concerns. For example, I mean, just yesterday I read in the paper, and you can put this in an essay, someone by the same Home Office who wants to send people to Rwanda, the same Home Office has actually given asylum to someone from Rwanda. So there's someone who left Rwanda to come to Britain and now has got asylum to stay in Britain because they believe that if they go back to Rwanda, they'll be persecuted, right? So do you see how ludicrous that is? You're giving asylum to someone who's fleeing Rwanda, but you have no problem in sending some Syrians or sending some Afghans to Rwanda, or some Albanians to Rwanda or something. And that shows how it is. Yes, go for it.
Lexi has just asked quickly if you could say what essay topics you could use the Rwanda example
in.
Yeah,
that's a very good point, Lexi. I should have said that. I think, again, it's probably political parties, but also rights in democracy. So, you've got that little section called rights. Also Parliament, because it is the parliamentary ping pong. So you could talk about Parliament there. Isn't it interesting that one example could be used across the board? I mean, I think if we were to think about it, you could probably use it in a number of more essays. But I would say political parties. I would certainly say democracy rights. Oh, you could use it as part of the Supreme Court. It's a good example of a recent
Yes.
Supreme Court judgment, couldn't you?
Tom asked that, and I was thinking that would be a very good example to
That's a
use.
very good example. And actually, very few people would use that example, I would suggest. So that's a great example to use. Yeah. Thank you, Tom. That's good, Tom. Anything else, Nora?
For now, I think that's that's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about the Red Wall. This is really important stuff, right? And again, this will help us to understand the Labour Party internal divisions, but also help us to understand some of the motivations of the Labour Party. Why is the Labour Party? Why does Keir Starmer always have the Union Jack behind him when he talks, right? Why does Keir Starmer always talk about, the fact that he met the Queen? Why does Keir Starmer always talk about the fact that he's deeply patriotic? Why does Keir Starmer always talk about, the king? And the way he talks about patriotism, it's very old style patriotism. And the reason being is because of the Red Wall. He needs to win these people back. Who are the Red Wall seats? Well, the Red Wall seats are these seats here: Stoke-on-Trent, Gedling, Hartlepool, mostly towns and sort of provincial cities, Wakefield, Workington. These are places across the North and Midlands who had always voted for the Labour Party. They're working class towns. They're disproportionately older. The reason why they're disproportionately older is because simply the younger people in those towns have moved out to the nearest cities. They've moved to Manchester or Liverpool or to London or to Birmingham. And in effect, you've got an oldest demographic, usually white and usually very pro-Brexit. And these people were the ones who switched to the Conservative Party in 2019. Now, if you remember, Boris Johnson gave a speech the day he was elected with an 80 majority. And really, he got that majority because of these Red Wall voters. And when he was elected, he said, "I know that I've borrowed your votes, and I'm going to make sure I do my best to keep you as Conservative voters." Well, the chances are they're not going to remain as Conservative voters, right? So these Red Wall seats, and again, just to list you the Red Wall seats, opinion polls say, look at that, from 22 onwards, the Labour Party are now doing better in those Red Wall seats than the Conservatives. And that's really the era of, this is the point at which the Conservative Party started to go nosedive. This was the end period of the Boris Johnson era, the Liz Truss era. Do you remember Liz Truss? The Liz Truss era, and then of course the Rishi Sunak. I've almost forgot his name. It's like posterity. I almost forgot his name. He's so inconsequential, actually, Rishi Sunak. Like, he's so invisible, probably. That, but anyway, the Conservative Party is at a very low ebb. By the way, these voters actually did like Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson was the guy who got Brexit done. But Rishi Sunak doesn't work very well in those seats. I mean, partly why Rishi Sunak, what was it? Is it the Grazia magazine or whatever it was, where he and his wife had this really, I mean, you've never seen a husband and wife so awkward than that interview, where, I think they were asked, what do you do for fun or something? He said, I do the dishwasher and I lay the table. And it was really weird, really, really weird. But the reason why they were saying that was simply because he's a multi-millionaire. His wife is even richer, right, than he is. And so they want to give the impression that they're normal blokes and normal people, like Boris Johnson did. And he's far from normal on so many levels, right? But Boris Johnson wanted to give, that impression. I once went to City Hall. I took a group of students to City Hall when Boris Johnson was the mayor. And these are students who are the most left-wing people you can find. By the end of that, they were all, oh, isn't Boris Johnson lovely? Isn't he a lovely man? I was like, but wait a minute, you are the most left-wing people, and you love Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson has a way of winning people over. I'll be honest with you, I didn't buy any of it. I remember he knew our college, so he sort of called out, name checked our college, and halfway he was talking, and halfway through he said, "Oh, I forgot to mention the good people from X college who are here today," and that was it. He could say, "I'm going to now support every genocide in the world," and they would still be saying at the end of it, "What a nice man Boris Johnson is." Anyway, so these red wall seats are turning blue, or had turned blue in 2019. They're slowly going back to red. It is very likely, by the way, they're not going to be blue any after the next election, right? However, here's the issue. The Labour Conservative Party know that they've run out of ideas to keep these red wall seats um, in their orbit. So what they're now doing is they're waging these culture wars, because the thing these people resonate with is they're anti-liberal, they're sort of very socially conservative, they tend to be more religious, or at least more Christian minded, even if they don't go to church. They tend to be very patriotic. They certainly are against trans rights and gay rights, certainly. So you're seeing that the Conservative Party are to hold on to those voters. They're talking about extremists and mobs on the streets, right? Which is ridiculous, really. But it's all for this. It's all for these voters. They need to keep these working class towns. And the way they think they're going to do it is by talking about extremism, and by pretending that the Palestine protests are all extremist protests, and by and what's his name, the ex co-chair of the party, whose name I forget, who went to Reform recently, and someone's going to mention his name on the comment section very soon. But he when he made that comment that Rishi, that Sadiq Khan is like a prisoner of his mates and the Islamists, right? And he obviously was caught out, because that was a step too far when he said that, right? Lee Anderson, thank you. Rochelle, Aisha was first. Aisha, fantastic. Aisha, why are you writing in caps? That's quite passive aggressive, Aisha. Caps, I always find caps to be. There's a guy who texts me at the moment, who happens to be a rabbi, believe it or not. I'm in conversation with a rabbi. Don't ask me why, but there's a rabbi who texts me who always writes in caps locks, right? In caps, and it's like he's shouting at me. I'm like, okay, how do I respond to it? But it's just the way he does. A friend of his told me, don't worry, he's always right. He writes everything in caps locks. So like he's not like angry with you or anything. That's just the way he writes. So that made me feel a little better. Okay, so yes, that's where we are. Aisha, why don't you tell everyone about your hatred for semicolons? Aisha, semicolons are you've triggered me. Semicolons are evil. It's a very evil. That's an evil thing to have in a piece of writing. Okay, let's say a few words about backbenchers, right? And about I've got some. I've just taken this from the essays that I've been putting together, but this is quite interesting. So I did some work on a few years back on how many votes the different governments have lost in Parliament, right? And Tony Blair, in his 10 years, only actually lost 4 divisions. Divisions is a fancy way of saying votes. He only lost 4 votes. And that's really extraordinary. And by the way, he lost most those 4 votes in 2005, 2006, in his dying days of his government. So for 10 years, he passed everything. And that's because he had a whopping majority at the very beginning. And so he could afford to, every bill that they wanted to pass, they passed it, right? So he only actually lost 4 times in Parliament. That's pretty extraordinary. Compare that to Theresa May. Oh, I should have said, compare that to the coalition government, where David Cameron only lost 6 times in that coalition government. So surprisingly, the coalition government was pretty stable. 5 years, only lost 6 votes in the House of Commons. Theresa May, between 2017 and 19, she lost 33 votes. So from 4 in 10 years to barely 2 years, she loses 33 votes. That's a great thing to put into a parliament essay. And you can see why. Because when you've got a slim majority or no majority, in the case of Theresa May after 2017, if you remember, she has no majority. She's got a minority government backed up by the DUP. When you've got a small majority, you then end up having to convince each and every one of your backbenchers. And people like Steve Baker. So Steve Baker is the Conservative MP for High Wycombe. But he's also he used to head the European Research Group, right? And these were the Brexiteers, the hardcore Brexiteers on the backbenches. And they were basically scuppering Theresa May's prime ministerialship. Every time she wanted to pass something, they would undermine her. And the reason why they were undermining her is because they wanted her to be tougher on Brexit, to be stronger on Brexit. So you got 33 divisions. You've got under Theresa May. Yeah, I've got some things there. Now, actually, believe it or not, Rishi Sunak's period has been quite stable in terms of passing things. So he hasn't lost very many divisions. And that's because he inherited Boris Johnson's 80 majority. So it's very difficult for him to lose a bill in Parliament, in the House of Commons, that is, because he's got a big majority, right? So yes, I don't need to say anything about that. I don't need to say anything about that. Yeah, the other thing to say is that you could get a question about divisions within the Conservative Party, and it's always worth knowing about some of these groupings that exist within the Conservative Party. I'm just going to name them very quickly. You've got the old 1922 committee, which is the committee that hosts the backbenchers. They've been pretty active. In fact, just today, I heard on the 1 o'clock news that Graham Brady. So I heard on the news that Rishi Sunak entered a meeting or went to a meeting today of the 1922 committee. They're basically an influential group of backbenchers, and all of the backbenchers belong to that group. And they have the reason why they're really important is that if 55 backbenchers submit a letter that they no longer have faith in the leadership of Rishi Sunak, then he's going to have a leadership election. So the current bookies, the betting shops are taking bets on whether there's actually going to be an election in October, or whether the 55 letters will be submitted anytime between now and October. And in order to prevent a leadership battle, Rishi Sunak calls a general election, right? So, and he's already said that, by the way, that if we end it, he's sort of like made it known that if these 55 letters are submitted, I'm not going to hold a leadership contest. I'm just going to, close down Parliament and call a general election. And remember, he can do that any time because it's his prerogative power to close down, to prorogue Parliament, or to shut down Parliament, and to announce a general election. Yes. Any questions on any? Maybe let me just finish this and I'll ask questions. You've got a number of other groupings. I think the other really important grouping is the One Nation Caucus, and it consists of 110 Conservative MPs, led by a guy called Damian Green, who was very close to Theresa May, who was the Deputy Prime Minister under Theresa May. Now, the reason why the One Nation Caucus is important is because all we hear about at the moment in the Conservative Party are the loony right wingers, the new Conservatives, they call them. I haven't written the New Conservatives yet. The new advert, the New Conservatives, and they're led by people like Suella Braverman. And these are basically, if you know American politics, these are the Trumpist style. These are the guys who are the most extreme of the Conservatives. I mean, if guns were allowed in this country, they would be wearing guns every day. That sort of that type of MP, right? But actually, they're not in the majority. The majority in the party, backbenchers, are actually the One Nation Caucus. So, and they're One Nations, if you remember, they're far more middle of the road. They're far less inclined to sort of the extremes of the party. You've also got the European Research Group, which are pro-Brexit, and they challenged Theresa May. You did have the COVID recovery group. They've gone now because COVID's gone. But you've got this group here, the Northern Research Group, which are a grouping within the Conservative Party. And they are basically these guys. These MPs have all formed the Northern Research Group, right? And the reason why the Northern Research Group is important is because they believe they're going to lose their seat in the next election. And so they're very worried. And they're trying to get Rishi Sunak to commit more money and more time to the North in order for them to keep their seats. So there is there is an agenda there that one needs to be aware of. How we're doing so far.
We have some
Yeah.
good questions for this.
Yeah.
So Alyssa asked you to explain just what the 33 division, the 4 divisions,
Oh yeah.
what they mean.
Votes, just votes. They lost 33 votes. They've lost 4 votes. So a vote on a bill, a vote on a motion, simply, anything that goes to a vote in the House of Commons is what we call a division. Yeah. The reason why they call it a division is that to vote in the House of Commons, you've got to go to what we call a division lobby. So you walk through some doors within the division lobby. So they call them divisions. They're like places where you vote. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. Rochelle has asked if you include other parties' backbenchers.
Yeah, you're right, Rochelle. You can. And I have got another slide on Labour divisions. I mean, the big divisions are foreign policy at the moment. But of course, you've got the left wingers in the Labour Party, in Corbyn and Diane Abbott, and John McDonnell. They represent the left wingers, but the left wingers are quite minor now. Richard Burgon, partly because they've been expunged from the Labour Party. A lot of them have now lost their whip. Diane Abbott, as you know, no longer sits as a Labour MP because of an article she wrote in a newspaper. Yeah. What else we got?
Aisha has asked the difference between New Conservatives and the Popcon group.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Aisha. So the Popcon and the New Conservatives, they're almost, if you draw 2 Venn diagrams, it is called a Venn diagram, isn't it? Yeah. It's not 2. Anyway, you draw 2 circles and then you got the thing in between. That's a Venn diagram, right? I was terrible at maths.
Yeah.
It's a Venn diagram, right? So on a Venn diagram, if you draw them, there are actually major overlaps, right? Like, because if I remember right, Liz Truss is a Popcon, but she's also part of the New Conservatives. I think the way it works is that they've fallen. Some of them don't like one another. So Suella Braverman, if I'm not mistaken, is in the New Conservative group, whereas Liz Truss is in the Popcons, right? Now, the Popcons, the Popular Conservatives, they've modeled themselves on the Trumpist right group. So a lot of them, like Liz Truss, was in America, and she met with some of the great and the good of the conservative right there. And so I think the Popcons has a very strong relationship with the American right, whereas the New Conservatives are more they're not as focused, or their connections with the Americans are not so great. I think that's right anyway. But I'll be honest with you, I remember, I mean, there's a really good podcast that I listen to every night, without fail. It's called The News Agents, and it's worth listening to between now and your exam. And they had a really good show once on the Popcons and the New Conservatives, and what is the difference between the two, and they were sort of laughing about it as well. So yeah.
A lot of people are asking if you could just briefly explain the Diane Abbott incident. Margaret has said how you could use it in an essay, and someone has also asked, is it true that she has got her whip back on the basis that she doesn't stand for the next general election?
That could be new news. I haven't heard that. I mean, the last I heard, she hasn't got the whip back. But there may be a deal they're trying to strike with her that she goes out gracefully. So there could be something like that. I don't know. But Diana, so she was sacked. In other words, the membership of the parliamentary party was taken away from her. In other words, they removed her whip. Diane Abbott, and the reason why it was done is because she wrote an article where she said that anti-Semitism is different to racism. It's a different type of racism, or it's a lower form of racism, right? And I think the implication there was that most Jews are white, whereas black people are different. Now, maybe that was a wrong, choice of words, and she realized it was a wrong choice of words, and she did correct the article, but the Labour Party threw her out. Now, probably they threw her out because they hate her anyway. Diane Abbott is, of course, a left winger, and like Jeremy Corbyn, the party would like to get rid of her. So, how could you use that in the essay? Well, you could use that by saying that the left wing. So, if you had a divisions within the Labour Party, you could say, the Labour Party has this left wing, but like Rebecca Long Bailey and Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, the left wing have slowly been expunged. They've been removed from the Labour Party. So some of the big hitters within the left wing are no longer sitting as Labour MPs. Sam Tarry is a good example of that in Ilford South. He was removed from the front bench when he joined a picket line. When he joined a strike, I think it was a RMT, it was a rail strike, and he joined it, and they said that's unacceptable. It tells you something about the Labour Party. It's a very authoritarian party, I have to say. I think more so than the Conservative Party. In a Conservative Party, you probably can get away with a lot at the moment, as long as you're not racist. And actually, to be honest, lots of conservatives find that even difficult. They constantly are racist, right? But as long as and even when they are racist, it will take them a week before Rishi Sunak even accepts and acknowledges that they're being racist. And again, why? Because they need those red wall voters, and actually a little bit of soft racism is not so bad for those red wall voters, because some of them I'm saying not all of them, some of them may have some prejudices. So yeah, Rishi Sunak. Anyway, so he was quite soft on Lee Anderson at the beginning. Anyway, yes, I don't know if I've answered your question. Whoever, if it Rosalie was asking that question, but anyway, so you could use that Diane Abbott example, I suppose, to show the divisions within the Labour Party, but then to say that it's not that big actually. Yeah, Nora, anything else?
Someone has just quickly asked if they haven't heard of Popcom till today. Is it something that should be spoken about in essays because they haven't seen it on the specification?
Yeah, you know what? By the way, you would never see any of this on the specification, because, like, you wouldn't even see the European Research Group probably, or the Northern Research Group on the specification. So never stick to the specification. I once had tea with the chief examiner, by the way. Okay, there were 100 other people in the room, but I still like to say I had tea with the chief examiner. And I got to ask him some really tough questions. And he actually wrote back. He was quite impressed with my questions. So he wrote a really long letter to me on some of the points. And I'll wave it around, like Liam Burns' letter. If any of you remember this from 2010, where David Cameron will wave around Liam Burns' letter. Anytime I'm in a meeting with my fellow politics teachers, I would wave around my chief examiner letter to say my chief examiner wrote to me. Anyway, what was, I can't remember what I was saying now. No, so yeah, you wouldn't need, look, you don't need it, but it's good to have it. Like, think about contemporary examples as going to Nirala Sweet Center. Have any of you been to Nirala or Ambala? Come on, Aisha, you're with me here, right? It's like, you don't need Nirala, right? Like, if you go to Nirala Sweet Center and you buy a burfi, it's not as if it's essential living. Like, you can live without it. But isn't your life a bit better, Aisha, with Nirala, sweets? I think so. Margaret has never been to Nirala. Margaret, you've not lived. You've got to go to Nirala or Ambala Sweet Center. Rosalie, are you saying you have been to Nirala? Fantastic. Excellent. Right. So, by the way, the more I'm thinking about it, more I've come to the conclusion, I probably need to do this. I probably need to repeat this sometime, because I'm not going to be able to get through my 33 slides but I have. I'm on slide 9. I'm on slide 9, not 33, 24 slides. Oh yeah, I deleted some. So I may go through 1 or 2 more because I think we're reaching 9 and we're on 58 people. So Aisha, you love the mitai. I thought so, Aisha, and that's not me stereotyping your name, but it is actually me stereotyping your name. Yes. Yeah, okay. I'm going to say a few words about party whips now. And again, this is quite relevant to Parliament. But maybe, just maybe, we would do this again next week. I will probably have to send out another message. I haven't got my schedule in front of me. So we may have to do this again next week to finish it off because I'm quite enjoying this, I have to say. I thought I was not going to enjoy it. I'm not saying because of you guys, but I just thought, but it's quite nice to talk about political examples. I may turn this into a podcast. I used to have an A-level politics podcast, but I never sustained it. But I might switch it back on and turn this to a podcast. Gursharan, what's codification? Gursharan, we spent the whole last lesson in our webinar looking at it. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to go through that. Yeah, Leonora. Sorry, I'm taking away your funder here, Nora. But Leonora's asked, can you show the slide so we can take screenshots? You know what, Leonora? I may send out these slides on my Substack. I'll do that, right? So as long as you're signed up to my newsletter, I will send these out as a PDF on it. So Margaret, you're good with this? Fantastic. That's good to hear. Right. Let's talk about party whips. And again, this is quite important for Parliament, but also quite important for political parties and for democracy, actually. Yes, I'm just going to cut through that. Right. So the first thing to say is that Boris Johnson, yes, Boris Johnson, he did something back in 2019 was pretty extraordinary. Boris Johnson, he got rid of 21 MPs in 2019. He in fact removed the whip from 21 MPs. Now that is a really interesting thing. It was a cull of MPs. What he did is he effectively removed a lot of the middle of the road conservatives because of their stance on Brexit. And he did that because he had a free line whip. That's a way of saying that it was a piece of legislation that was that if you didn't vote for, there were going to be repercussions, right? So free line whip it's obligatory for you to vote with the party. If you vote against the party, there may be implications. There were 21 MPs, including people like Kenneth Clarke, who was the father of the House. So the father of the House is the oldest male in the House. Rory Stewart, who had just stood for Conservative leadership elections, who had lost it to Boris Johnson. David Gauke, who was the Justice Secretary under Theresa May. They decided they're going to disobey the whip and vote against Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. And they didn't think Boris Johnson would throw out 21 people from the parliamentary party, and he did. Rory Stewart was thrown out of the party. Rory Stewart now is a podcaster because he never joined the Conservative Party, right? Now, by the way, these three were One Nation Conservatives. So there was a cull of One Nation Conservatives. So again, if you had an essay on conservative divisions, you could cite the example of these 21 largely One Nation MPs who were thrown out. Amber Rudd used to be the Home Secretary. She was chucked out of the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Who else was there? Oh, what's her name? I can't remember her name now. But anyway, there were really important people who were thrown out of the party at the time. Yes. Now, why does that matter? It matters because it shows that the party whips are pretty strong when they need to be. Now, Rishi Sunak's different. Rishi Sunak's party whips are quite weak. There's a lot of disobedience going on, but Rishi Sunak hasn't done anything about that disobedience, right? unlike Boris Johnson in 2019. By the way, when Boris Johnson did that, his minority went down to something like 50. But he didn't care because he used it as a way of winning the next election. Look, I got rid of these pesky Europeans, pro-Europeans in my party. Now you need to vote for me. That was the message he sent out to the Brexit seats. Um, there was an occasion recently, by the way, and it was under Johnson, where William Ragg, who was a Conservative MP, he claimed that he was going to vote against the government, and the whips threatened to withhold investments in his constituency. So let me explain that. This is pretty bad, by the way. You're not allowed to do this. So there was the government has this fund. Let's call it a fund. The government has a fund where it was given money to areas that are socially impoverished, poorer areas, right? William Ragg lived in one of those areas, and he was getting a pot of money for his area. He decided to vote against the government, and the whip said to him, if you vote against the government, you may lose that money. That is unacceptable, by the way, to do that, because you can't link your voting intentions to money for your constituents. He went public and said, look, this is unacceptable, and he called for Boris Johnson to resign because of that. So again, that shows you some of the seedy activities of the whips. You can bring that in a democratic deficit essay. I mean, I would certainly talk about how the whip sometimes functions in a democratic deficit essay. Yeah, I don't need to talk about that. I don't need to talk about that. Right. Okay. So, yes, I've already talked about this, haven't I? I didn't delete this slide, so that's good. Right, select committees. I'm going to stop there, I think, because I think we've done 1.5 hours of. I'm going to take now your general questions, and I think we'll come back to this. So that's a nice place to stop, and we could probably do. Maybe I'll do more of this. Maybe I'll do like half an hour here or an hour there in a lead up to your. If you guys like that, I mean, do you think this is worth? I mean, obviously you're the diehards. There's 50 of you. We've cut this by half, so you guys have obviously stuck with it. You're the Conservatives who remain loyal to Rishi Sunak to the very end. That's who you are. You are loyal Conservative members. Okay. Alicia, you like it? Great. You've never understood a whip before. Fantastic. Yes, useful. Fantastic. Right. Have I missed a number of questions, Nora?
I've collected a lot of general questions.
Go for it.
I've got them all collected here.
Yeah.
So someone has asked, and I can't remember who these people were, but someone has asked what you believe is the best way to structure revision from now until the exam.
Essays. Remember Tony Blair said education, education, education. If I was to give a political speech, I would love to be a political speech writer. But if I was to give a political speech, I would say essays, essays, essays. That's how you've got to think, right? If you're not writing essays, you're not revising. So between now and your exam, focus on essay questions. Pick up my book. Sorry to do the hard sell again. I'm terrible at selling. But I don't need to. Let me grab it. Right. Pick up this book, and you've got in here lots and lots of potential essay questions and sources, and just work your way through them. Just work your way through those questions, right? You got like pages of essays. Work your way through these questions one by one. And what you would find is with political parties, even though I've listed here, I've listed 18 questions here. I think if you answered 6 of them, you probably have answered most of them, because some of the questions are similar. So I say to students, just open up a Word document and just work through these questions one by one, right? That's how you revise. Now you're going to say to me, but wait a minute, I've spent a whole year doing global politics or US politics, and I've forgotten UK politics. I need to go back to the textbook and start reading through the textbook. I would say to you, don't do that. Don't read the textbook. Read the textbook only proportionate to an essay question, right? So when you write an essay question, then revise that section paragraph by paragraph. Revise that section by going through the your notes or going through the textbook. Don't start with the textbook. Start with an essay question. In other words, every time you start your revision, start with an essay question. That's how you do it. There's going to be, I can never convert enough of you, by the way, because there's always people who say to me, no, that's not how I revise. And I'm sorry, but I would say that that's on you rather than rather than that's on me. I don't know if that sounds really evil. Anyway, Nora, what's next? What else we got?
Is it better to write the examples specific to each topic instead of generally? So I'm guessing, is that like specific to each argument? And I would say yes.
Yeah, I think so, Nora. I think that's. In fact, Nora, you're a good example of this. In a way, you're probably learning your examples by writing essays, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have asked, is it better to go through content and then write essays? But I find that writing essays actually does help you embed the content knowledge.
Yeah.
I think it's much easier to learn it in an essay context than just having it in notes. But that's just my opinion.
And it's not, that's certainly my opinion as well. I think you're absolutely right. And actually, I think you're probably going to remember that example better because you've written it in a context of an essay. So like any example you have when you're writing an essay, the likelihood is you're going to remember it. Like what I say to students is write an essay, read it out to yourself, read it out loud to one another, and you'll be in a better place, I believe. Yeah, what else have we got?
How should I use the specification to guide my revision?
I wouldn't guide your revision by the specification.
Yeah.
I would guide your revision by essay questions. Okay, so it is okay. I'm not gonna sort of have a go at the example, but the specification is it's useful, but it's really for us, for teachers. What I've done is I went through each and every bullet point in the specification and asked myself, what sort of questions would I have to answer in order to tick that specification bullet point? So I would ignore the spec, even though I have actually put the spec in this book, I have to say, but I wouldn't really focus on the spec. I would just focus on the exam questions. Yeah.
So Sarah has asked, I hope I'm saying that correctly, how you would approach AO2 and could you use an example how to analyze? And Nicoletta has asked a similar question. What are some tips to max out each assessment objective? Because their teacher never went into detail with AO2. So
yeah, can I suggest watch on the front page of my website, you've got two videos, one on how to write 30 marker, another on how to write sources. Can I suggest you watch those because I dedicate probably 20 minutes or so to AO2 analysis. And to be honest, everyone that's watched it has said to me that they get it once they watch it. So instead of me repeating it in like a minute or two here unsuccessfully, I think watch that video and you'll be fine. Yeah.
People are asking for your predictions for paper 1.
Yeah, I have started to focus on that, but I haven't quite finished it. I'll do a live stream on predictions at some point, but I loathe to do that at this stage. I mean, I know I have been sort of doing it with my webinar students, but I do fear doing it at this stage because what students then do is they focus in too much. What I've done in my webinars is I tell students, here are the essays that I think we should all focus on. But closer to the time, I will then say, all right, here are even greater, here's a greater focus. If I focus it too closely now, what tends to happen is that students then just stick to those 2 or 3 essays. And that's living life dangerously. That's like living life in the red wall. That's what I think. Yeah.
I think Sarah asked what points would you use for a pressure group essay. I said, and I say there are quite a few pressure group exemplars on the website. So if you would like to go and look at that, I did upload one. So
Oh yes, yeah, yeah.
But I think it's mostly like the 4s are mostly about dispersing power and protecting human rights and things
Do you
like
remember any specific pressure groups you used in your essay, by the way, Nora?
that.
Oh yeah, I don't. I'm gonna put you on the spot. I can't remember this. I can't remember. I think I
I
used. Yeah,
top
go
of
on.
my head.
Yeah,
I talked about Cage UK,
Cage UK. Yes.
Greenpeace for environmental. I talked about Marcus Rashford as being an independent pressure group.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're all the ones I can think of off the top of my head now.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah, they're good ones. I like that. I like those ones. Yeah, look at Nora's essay for examples of pressure groups. Lee, did I predict? Sorry, I'm taking your thunder head. Lee, did I predict? Did you predict any questions last year? I sort of did, Lee, and I was quite lucky last year because especially component 2. I think the entire paper I had gone through one of the questions. I mean, component 1, apart from the party funding question, the other questions we had effectively done. Yeah. So it's not, by the way, I'm not a clever guy, and I'm not saying I'm a genius here. It's just obvious sometimes you can't, it's not about patterns. It's about looking at the spec and then working out what sorts of questions may come out, and then an educated guess as a teacher as to what I think they would ask. So for example, they haven't yet asked a question about the differences between the parties on policies and ideas. So surely that's due, because that's the nub of what political parties are. So they've asked 2 questions on party funding. So surely they shouldn't ask the party funding again. I don't know, but I can't imagine they would. But asking a question on on the divisions between parties is quite relevant, I would suggest. Yeah.
Jason, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. How many essays should you get done? Personally, I just say as many as you can, really.
Yeah. That's yeah.
And Sarah has asked how many examples for each paragraph. Yeah.
It depends on the essay. I mean, examples are always very good. So as long as you've got a good balance of examples and analysis in your paragraphs, you should be fine, Sarah. So I wouldn't worry too much about skimping on examples. Of course, you don't want to turn it into a newspaper article where all you've got are examples, because you've got to analyze those examples, right? Yeah.
Yes, we keep getting new questions. How do you use the essays you've written to revise afterwards? Alyssa's asked.
Yeah, so once you've written an essay, you normally write it in untimed conditions, right? So, because you're going to be writing paragraph by paragraph, Googling it, going to the textbook. So inevitably, it may take you an hour and a half to write an essay, and you don't have that much time in an exam. So what I would do is I would write a perfect essay, and then read it over, read it out loud, read it out to your mates. It's a really good idea to pair up with someone, to set each other a separate essay, and then to write it, and then to read those essays to one another. So you're pooling essays together. And the more you read something out and the more you write it, the more you're going to remember it. And so the next stage is, after you've done that, after you've read it out, you rewrite those essays in timed conditions. And the chances are you're going to remember more, and you're going to be able to write quicker because you've already written it out once before. So a technique I normally suggest to students is, you at the moment just write your essays in untimed conditions, and pile up, 10 essays for argument's sake, pile these essays up, and then give yourself like a window of a week where you're just rewriting those old essays after you read them over, right, through memory in timed conditions. And the more you learn to do that, the more you're going to be able to remember those essays. I've never found a student who's done this who's failed in an exam, or who's done very poorly in an exam. In fact, the opposite. Students who've done this, they're writing full, they rewrite it sometimes. So you've got 2 versions of an essay. Oh, by the way, when you've got those 2 versions of an essay, one timed, one untimed, you compare them, And then in the untimed piece, you underline or you highlight parts that you've forgotten. So if, for example, you had not written an example, you highlight it, right? And the chances are the next time you write it, maybe in an exam, you will remember that example because you've already had some time to reflect on your essay. Again, if that doesn't make so much sense, I have got another video on my site with 2 students who I tutored on essay writing and how to bring that into your revision. Yeah. Anything else? Kashfi has asked the question. My politics teacher didn't teach us any UK politics, and with a sad face. I mean, that's pretty sad. How would you? So the advice is the same. Don't worry about it. Well, do worry about it, but don't worry about it in the sense that just work through essay questions. That's the way you revise, right? Work through essay questions. What else we got, Nora?
Sorry, I just had to. So a lot of people are struggling with ideologies and asking for if you could maybe do a session or a live stream helping with that. I know you do have a how to answer an ideologies question video on your website, so that will be definitely good to check out. I think it is hard revising ideologies from the textbooks.
Oh, the textbooks are awful on ideology, and I'm actually in the process of writing a textbook on ideologies, which I think will make ideologies far more easier to understand. Like the way I'm writing it is essay by essay. So conservatives on the economy, liberals on human nature or something. So I actually write it as if you're answering an essay rather than, write it as like the way they do at the moment, which is all over the shop. So how do you? Yeah. So I have actually got on my website some, and they're not very expensive at all, but I've got on my website each of the ideologies and the most common questions to answer of those ideologies. So they're basically webinars I did last year. So I don't think I'm going to repeat them again this year. So you can probably just get them. Failing that, I am going to probably do an ideologies revision day soon as well, which will be in central London or in South London. Sorry, and Nora's arranged something, in South London as well. So if anyone's from either central North London or South London, or from up north, you can come down and attend those. A lot of people do come down actually from other cities to my revision conferences. Yeah,
I actually have ideologies essays written, so if everyone, I'll get them uploaded on the website, and hopefully that will help people out.
Oh, thank you very much, Nora. Nora, you're a star. Thank you very much for that. There are lots of students who don't want to give out their essays, but
I think that's silly.
It is
personally. Yeah. Someone's asked. I feel like this is always asked every year. Do you think it's a good idea to only study 2 ideologies?
No, because you could have, and they could do it this year, they can do it. You may have one ideology repeated twice in paper 1. So 2 conservatism questions or 2 liberalism questions or 2 socialism questions. So, and imagine that's the ideology you hadn't revised, then you are in trouble. You're in trouble. So I wouldn't do that. But they're not that difficult, by the way. I know people get worked up about the ideologies, but I just don't think that they're actually that difficult. Because actually, for each paper, for each ideology's topic, think about it in essay forms. There are only probably 6 or 7 questions they can ask you for each ideology. So it's not that difficult, guys. As long as you've learned all 6 for each ideology, you're perfectly fine. Yeah. Noah says Nora is a goat. That's
Thank
good to
you.
hear. She doesn't gatekeep. Yeah.
No. Never.
So I think, should we call it a day, Nora? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think for now, if anyone has any last minute questions, but I think for now
I think we're good. We're good. So I think we'll probably have to repeat this and continue the. I expected to get through much more, and that's probably my failing to not anticipate that. But we've done pretty well, haven't we? We've done pretty well today. So thank you, everyone, and Yes, Lee, can you do a video on the types of questions they can ask on ideologies? Yeah, maybe I can do that. Or we can publish it on the website. Just some like a bank of questions. It's not that difficult. Just think about ideologies as human nature, society, state, and economy, and then the principles of the ideologies. And there are around 5 or 6 principles. So you've just got to you either get a question on the principles, or you get a question on these 4 things: states, economy, human nature, and society. So you can predict the questions quite easily. Actually, it's not that difficult. But if you want, I can do that. Maybe, Nora, we could do a TikTok video where I can just read out the 7 ideologies, conservatism questions, 7 liberalism questions, and 7 socialism questions, or something.
I've made TikToks that go through each of the key points for all of the core ideologies. So if anyone needs help with that, they can look at the TikTok.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I may then publish. So people are saying the textbook isn't that good. I may then publish, instead of, if you don't want to get my, you don't want to watch the webinars that I did, the videos are on my website. I may publish, like I've done here with the plans. I may publish an ideologies book with the plans in them. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, do I have any videos on relationship between the branches? Yeah, that's all coming up. So I'm going to be doing that not next week. I'm going to be doing that in 2 weeks' time with my webinar group that I have every Monday evening, Lexi. So you're welcome to join those, because I think there may be an EU question this year. I know it's a horrible question, but there may be one for relations. So I'm going to do a lot on the EU, I think. Aisha, fantastic. I will probably get around to doing that. All right, guys. So I think we've run out of time. So it's been wonderful speaking to you guys, and thank you, Nora, for
Thank you.
for helping today.
Happy to help.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I think EU for sure. It was only us in 2019. Yes, it was, Tom. All right, guys. I think we're going to end there, because otherwise I'll end up just reading these comments. So this will be available on the YouTube site, YouTube page, or whatever it's called. And I hopefully will do something quite similar next week. Until then, see you later, guys. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.